Judith Robertson. I'm the chair of the Scottish Human Rights Commission.
And I'm Emma Hudson. I'm Head of Communications and Engagement with the Scottish Human Rights Commission. Judith, we're here today to mark the end of your term as chair of the Commission. So we're going to talk for about half an hour about what you've achieved, some sort of specific points of interest from the last 6 years, and get some thoughts from you about where you see the future of human rights in Scotland. So thanks for being with us. So first of all, can you just tell me, I know the answer to this, but you can tell me what's been keeping you busy the last few weeks in the post?
Very many things. So I'm just about to review our submission in relation to the UK Government's review of the Human Rights Act, so our consultation response in relation to that. I'm also handing over the co-chair of SNAP, which, as we will no doubt go on to discuss, has been a long-standing project of the Commission. So I'm literally handing that over as it reshapes and relaunches itself. What else am I doing? We're coming to the end of the process of the Historic Abuse Interaction Review Group, and we will next week sign off the final sort of communique from the group to the Deputy First Minister, in recognition of the work that the group has done and the action plan and the progress that Scotland has made in relation to access to justice for survivors of historic abuse. Yeah, so that's just some of the things.
So quite a gentle wind down to the end.
Yes, it doesn't feel like very gentle at all. I suspect I'm going to hit a wall shortly.
And with all of that happening, how are you feeling as you approach the end of your term?
Yeah, very mixed feelings actually. A combination of, well, I'm not quite there yet, but expectant relief that I will stop. A kind of, there's a sort of bittersweet element to the fact that I will stop. You know, I will actually stop doing this work and engaging on the issues that I care about and the processes that generate those issues, and also obviously with the staff, colleagues, all the different people I've worked with over the 6 years. So that will really change. That dynamic will really change. So I'll really miss that.
Yeah. So mixed feelings as you come to the end. So so we've known each other the whole of your time in office, and in fact going back before that. So just to kind of step back in time to 6 years ago, as you were about to take up post as chair of the Commission, having been an external stakeholder to the Commission, that's how we first met. If you can remember how you were feeling and what you were expecting as you anticipated starting in the post, what can you remember about that moment in time? Well,
I will tell a funny story, because I was in a room with yourself and other colleagues, you probably remember this, and you were all discussing who the new chair was going to be.
Gossiping.
You were discussing it, yes, and you were. There was some deliberations as to, it has to be a woman and it has to be this, and I was sitting in the room enjoying the conversation because I couldn't tell you. I wasn't allowed to say at that point, and it was very funny, it was good. Well, I was thrilled actually to get the job. I was thrilled, but my first day, it's not really a but it was slightly overwhelming. Was literally I had to get a flight to Geneva to join the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions annual general meeting, to meet the more than 100 other national NHRIs. I couldn't even say an acronym at that point quickly, and to just sit in the chamber at the UN. Somewhere there's a photograph of me behind the moniker of Scotland. And actually receive what was then our second re-accreditation of our A status. So it was a fairly sort of auspicious start, if you want to put it like that. I had lunch with the commissioners, not all of them, but some of whom had come to join, and I met quite a few of the staff team at that point. So it was, and I was staying in a hotel in Geneva, and I had conversations into the night, really sort of beginning to say, what is it I've taken on here? Really come to terms with, oh my goodness, you know. And looking round the room as the meeting unfolded, there was just a sort of such an august range of individuals who were, heading up their institutions. It was very humbling, I have to say, and I felt like that ever since, to be honest. That feeling hasn't really gone away.
Interesting. Quite a quite an introduction to the role.
Yeah, it was very much, and it was actually lovely to meet some people who became good friends. The Commission in Ireland was then headed up by a woman like me who had come into the role, and the Commission in Northern Ireland was headed up with I don't know how to describe him. He was such a lovely but very long in the tooth, battle-hardened campaigner for human rights, and just huge respect for both of them, and they became good friends. Have become good friends as my time has gone on.
And we'll pick up some of this, but I just wonder, looking back then, thinking about your kind of connection to human rights and the work that you've done in human rights, and then coming into that very international human rights environment. I wonder if you could say a wee bit about what that was like.
Yeah, it wasn't unfamiliar to me. The UN connection was unfamiliar to me. I hadn't operated in that sphere before, but I had worked for Oxfam. And so I was used to an international sphere and used to that international dynamic. And to be honest, I hadn't reckoned on that being as significant a part of the job. It wasn't why I came for the job, let's say. It has become, I mean, obviously it was before I started, and it is a good part of the job. But I suppose it had, in the course of my work, my interest in human rights and my understanding of it had matured out with the Commission, but still was actually relatively, compared to where I am now, relatively nascent if you look back. But I do remember a conversation with my predecessor, Alan Miller, and Kavita, Head of Strategy and Legal here, before I started, in fact, talking about the two, what did I think my priorities would be. And I sort of looked at the draft strategic plan as it was then, and I said, well, I think accountability and participation are the two things that really kind of jump out for me as coming from primarily the third sector. Those were the issues that was, particularly that accountability piece, was what sort of landed me here. The recognition that actually NGOs in Scotland don't do that. They do a soft accountability, but they don't use the law to really support their activities. So I was really keen to see how that could evolve.
Great, thanks. Just to go a little bit personal for a moment before we come back to some of the rights issues. Sort of thinking back over the last 6 years, what personal qualities would you say you've brought to the role as chair of the Commission?
I suppose, I mean, listening is something I've realised I do. I mean, obviously we all listen, but we all listen to varying degrees. The range of the volume and range of issues that we deal with, having to, be across them. I'm not across them. I couldn't be because there's so many. But having to be across them enough to be able to be an effective chair. So that, I don't know what that quality is, but just being able to embrace that. There have been moments for sure when I've been somewhat overwhelmed by that, but actually just sort of getting to grips with that. And then I suppose tenacity. I mean, you just, and stubbornness actually. I mean, it's if you haven't got that, it's required. For me it has been just to sort of, actually we're going to have to just hang on in there and sit out whatever dynamic is going on.
So one of the things that I don't think any of us could have anticipated was the COVID pandemic, which has marked the last couple of years of your term as chair. How has that shaped the work and your work for the last couple of years?
Oh, it's had a massive impact. I mean, a massive impact in substance, as in the focus of the Commission's work. Really, looking at how people's rights are being upheld or not upheld. Both of those, I wouldn't say in equal measure, but both of those, and working with different groups to try to understand the direct impact on individuals, on groups of people, and really bring that to life. Engage with the Parliament. I mean, in volume and in a whole range of issues, quite intensively, and had the reaction back from that. So having to also deal with that and pick up the demand that has been generated, as well as the sort of intensity of debate, and in some levels understanding about human rights and how that's grown and again matured, I would say, to some degree. It's hard to measure whether that's a considerable degree or not, but it's certainly grown. I think it's had a massive impact on our ways of working. Not always beneficial, I have to say. I think we've lost, not any more than any other organisation, but that human connectivity, which all our work is utterly built on, has been eroded, and I can feel that and see that in all sorts of spheres. But it's emerging now, like even today in our offices, we've brought some stuff back to life. That's felt really good to begin to re-engage directly with people. But the impact of not doing that for 2 whole years, I think we're all feeling that in different ways.
Yeah, indeed. So just to kind of dive into some more of the areas of human rights progress or not, as the case may be, over the course of your term in office. One of the big areas of work for the Commission and one of the areas of development on human rights has been around economic, social and cultural rights, and particularly the incorporation of those, or the potential incorporation of those rights into Scotland's domestic law. What's your reflection on that journey?
Well, I mean, what can I say? It's not come to its end at this point, but we've certainly travelled a long road, and it's come a huge distance. Just before I got the job, in fact, I attended a big SNAP event in Dynamic Earth where the First Minister spoke and made some, I would say, tentative commitments around exploring the potential to incorporate economic, social, cultural rights in Scotland, along with a commitment to recognise that, I mean, more than a commitment, a recognition that the realisation of rights was a priority, or should be a priority for any government. So that was really important to see that. And then through the work of the Commission, of SNAP, of very many civil society partners, to see the government kind of, I suppose I would say, commitment to that become stronger, more purposeful, more deliberate, and broader. And so when the First Minister took forward an initial commitment to set up an advisory group looking at human rights leadership, partly in response to Brexit as well, and really wanting to make progress in these areas, that was a significant step. That then led to the task force, and again a commitment to incorporate. And then, I mean, remarkably, not just economic, social, cultural and rights and the treaties that relate to that, but CEDAW, CERD and the CRPD, the rights of women, people from ethnic minorities and people with disabilities. And so, I mean, that felt huge. That was a massive milestone. And really, the next steps, the steps in that process, the incorporation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, or the steps towards that, even with some setbacks. These are massive movements made by the government in Scotland, and to be honest, 6 years ago, there is no way we'd even conceive, but not no way we'd have conceived it being possible, but I don't think we would have conceived we'd have got this far in this time and made this progress. And there's lots of factors in that, a whole list of them. But there's no doubt in my mind the Commission has played a key role in both driving it forward, supporting other organisations to do that, and then to a level holding government's feet to the fire to say, no, keep going, make it good, make it strong, make it as good as it can be. And that's been really positive.
Excellent. And as you say, unfinished business that your successor will have to play a key role in continuing, I'm sure. And just to I suppose explore the challenge of progressing that agenda in the context of Brexit, as you mentioned, and what we've seen in terms of an ongoing threat to the Human Rights Act. You mentioned that earlier. Can you talk about some of the challenges for the Commission in navigating that?
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly the dichotomy of sort of direction, possibly, in the, potentially UK government choosing to go in one direction with the Human Rights Act, while the Scottish government goes in another direction around incorporation of other treaties, a wider range of treaties. And clearly the tension between what happens to the Human Rights Act and what happens to the Scotland Act and Scotland's commitments in relation to human rights, or legal obligations in relation to the Human Rights Act, that throws up lots of issues that we're currently just beginning to unpack at the moment. However, I suppose when I started in the job, and this, I don't think this has changed at all, when you talk to people on the street about the things they care about a bunch of our economic, social, cultural rights. They care about the right to health, the right to housing, the right to education, the right to an adequate standard of living, the right to these core rights. Those are the rights that people care about. And when I started at the Commission, and way before I started, the Commission had sort of acknowledged that and recognised that, yes, obviously civil and political rights are where Britain has traditionally felt it's comfortable, and showing leadership. So we always had that road to travel around economic, social, cultural rights. We still have that road to travel. It hasn't gone away. People still care about those things first, and so that's what's anchored me in helping maintain the Commission's commitment to that.
And so then to move on to SNAP, Scotland's National Action Plan for Human Rights, you've mentioned a couple of times. The purpose of SNAP, I suppose, has always been to really focus on the implementation of rights in practice in people's lives. So again, can you reflect on where SNAP was when you joined and where it is now?
Yeah, again, it's also, I keep using this analogy, we're on a journey. But when I joined the Commission, I think the Commission was really interrogating how do they want SNAP to go forward? What can we do? It had stretched the organisation at some points to its limits, and there was a sense that it was time for somebody else to pick up the reins and move it forward. I would say only now has that begun to start happening. Although that, again, we made a huge contribution to that. So did very many other people across Scotland who've sustained their engagement around a national action plan for human rights, recognise that it's got a role to play in Scotland's political and economic development, and really wanting to see that thrive. So where we are now is in a much better place. We have, I would say, a much more sustainable partnership with government in relation to that, and it's a government obligation. The Commission will ultimately, hopefully, be able to step back and see that, monitor and support an action plan, but not be the leading, the sort of driving force behind it.
Yep. One of the aims of SNAP has always been to build a stronger human rights culture in Scotland, and indeed that's been an aim of the Commission. Where would you say we're at on that? On a journey again, I assume? Very
much so, and we're definitely further along, in the sense that I would say, not universally by any means, but both the understanding of the role rights play in people's lives, I think, has grown a lot. There's no doubt that COVID has contributed to that growth and understanding. People have begun to engage with human rights as a real thing that impacts on their lives, much more so. And that's really positive. So the narrative around human rights is much more present, it's much stronger, you can see people sort of interact with that. Where I think there is still a long way to go is in actually bringing about that genuine accountability. So how we're so shy of accountability. It's not a Scottish phenomenon. We don't have a monopoly on shyness in relation to accountability, certainly not politically. But we're reluctant to commit to that, and you'll see it across legislative processes. Most governments will pull back from that, what I would consider, and from a human rights perspective, genuine, focused accountability that that people have some sort of redress, some sort of access to justice if things go wrong, some sort of mechanisms whereby governments are held to account, states are held to account for their human rights realities. So we still have that that bit of the road to walk, and that's, I would say, some of the global events is where you begin to see the weaknesses in those accountability mechanisms and the lack of accountability and how that undermines people's rights, both domestically and internationally.
Thanks. Just to, I suppose, go back to what brought you into human rights in the first place. You mentioned you worked for Oxfam previously and you have a kind of strong background in social justice and campaigning. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that took you into human rights? What sparked your interest in the first place?
It's hard to know. I mean, way back, what sparked my interest? Well, there's loads of things that sparked my interest, but I used to work in Easterhouse in a stress centre in Easterhouse, and I used to I did some home visits, and I visited a woman's home, and she didn't have any carpets on the floor. And she was impoverished. Her life was very not thriving, and I was shocked. I was young. I was shocked. I didn't realise the extent to which people's lives in Scotland were like that. That was a long time ago, and that, the fact that I'm even recollecting it now meant it did something to me. It had an effect on me. I saw loads of other examples in working in that community. I saw a group of people who had been in a very sort of rights-respecting actual action, sort of not removed, but I don't know how to say it, rehoused from a mental institution. This was 30 odd years ago, plus more, but they had very profound mental illnesses, and they were really some of them struggling to cope in the community. And I was so shocked at how people were left to just cope by themselves in those contexts, and they had some support, some small support. I don't want to discredit the people who were involved in those days, but at any level, but just the state of our public services in terms of actually realising people's rights to all the things that we sort of talk about and hold dear. So at that sense of it's not okay, it's not good enough, that isn't good enough, we can do better than that, has really sort of driven my understanding. It's also driven my sense of, if we don't actually engage everybody who's got a stake in this process, people whose rights are being abused or not upheld. If we don't hear those voices genuinely, and then nothing we do will make the difference, because it's only on the basis of that experience can you actually help people walk out of those realities. And for public services, public sectors, public authorities to really listen to that experience and react and respond to it with some kind of humility and reality. For me, that's what's driven my sort of commitment to this.
What you're talking about reminds me of that famous Eleanor Roosevelt quote that we all use about human rights really having no meaning unless they have the meaning in the small places close to home, and obviously that was a quote from around the time of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So just to kind of take us to that international human rights space for a minute. You've talked about Scotland. What would your assessment be of the state of human rights advocacy around the world at the moment, globally, and in all sorts of ways? Today's events, or this week's events, are very, I suppose, deeply damaging to the human rights progress that we want to make internationally and domestically. They damage us all. There's no doubt about that.
And when you hear the stories of what's actually happening to people in Ukraine, that's again when Roosevelt, if we can't protect people's rights in their own homes and their right to life and their right to dignity and respect, then clearly we are failing. And greater heads and souls than I are saying these things, around the world today. And you can see the inadequacies of the human rights system actually in holding those perpetrators to account. That's really challenging. Everybody sees that. That's not lost on anybody. However much we want to engage with it or don't engage with it, we can see that. And so that aspect of accountability and respecting what accountability genuinely can do is just so important. It's not there just now. It's absent.
And of course the function and the purpose of national human rights institutions within the UN system, so national human rights institutions like the Commission, like our global family of NHRIs is part of that, and strengthening that network is part of that. How important have those relationships been to you in your role as chair of the Scottish Human Rights Commission?
Yeah, they've been really important. I mean, and for all sorts of reasons. Obviously, there's lots of good practice examples. You see people do things very differently, and we've learned from that. We've also contributed to it in the Commission. It's quite interesting. When I realised internationally that focusing on economic and social cultural rights for a national human rights institution was relatively unusual. In fact, very unusual. And so that, again, over the course of it, took me aback. And I realised to some degree that even within the national human rights networks, we sort of bought into that whole narrative that civil and political rights somehow trumped economic, social, cultural rights. Clearly that's not true, but there was a sort of sense of that. And I'm really pleased that the Scottish Human Rights Commission has sort of played that role of saying, no, you can engage meaningfully in this, you can make progress in these areas, and here's some good examples. The housing project that the report is there, the housing rights project in Leith that we ran is a really good example of that work where you're attempting to make rights real, come real, engage the different stakeholders in that process. It's not perfect, but was a good attempt. So that those international spheres have given us a lot of food for thought, I would say, and just the relationships. Just actually, that's my support group. There aren't too many people who are the chairs of human rights commissions around the world. It's a small group, and so personally, I've drawn a lot of support from some of the people in those networks, and they are supportive places. So that's been really helpful.
Thank you. So, looking ahead, as you leave, as you exit, where would you like to see the Commission in 10 years' time?
Oh, in 10 years, I would like to see the Commission larger than it is, just because with the scope of the work and the I would like that to grow, and therefore the Commission to grow with it. I would like it to have more power. To have more of that sense of being able to hold states to account, and to do that practically and meaningfully through its own mechanisms. But I would like it to inhabit an environment where we're not on our own. That's a shared endeavour, and the understanding around that is much stronger. There's a lot to play for, as it were, for the Commission over the next 10 years. So I really look forward to seeing that flourish.
And what would your message to your successor in post be?
Trust your staff. They have, if not all the answers, sometimes, a huge number of them. And the knowledge and commitment that they bring, the staff team bring, is what it's the powerhouse of the organisation. Engage all the commissioners in that shared endeavour to be the voice or the sort of maybe it's not so much the voice, because there's plenty of voices now talking in Scotland about human rights, but be at the forefront of that narrative, so that governments hear what the Commission's saying and be proud of that and stand on that ground very squarely. There's a lot going on which will knock potentially in the future, so we'll need to be pretty strong.
Okay. And on a personal note, what are your plans for your next chapter?
You know, it's amazing. I have a huge dearth of plans, which I'm very happy about. I'm very happy not to have plans at the moment. I need a break from plans. I've no idea. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm really looking forward to not knowing what to do.
Well, whatever you decide to do, and we'll obviously, as a staff team, get a chance to say goodbye to you properly next week, but I'm sure you know that you embark on whatever the next chapter is with all of our very best wishes. So, Judith, thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all the staff team and the Commission team in the Scottish Human Rights Commission. I am but an individual in a much bigger pool, so I play a role, but so does everybody else. So it's absolutely a shared effort.
Well, thank you for your part in it.
Thank you.